Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
Hello and welcome. I'm Jeffrey Mishlove. Our topic today is UFO Contactees. My guest, once again, is Greg Bishop. He is co-author of the book A is for Adamski, a book about UFO contactees. He is also the author of Project Beta, a book that we've talked about dealing with the national security state and the development of modern UFO mythology. And the final book, It Defies Language, a collection of his essays about UFOs and ufology. Welcome, Greg.
Hello. Thanks, Joe.
It's a pleasure once again to be with you. You're the co-author of A is for Adamski, and I already forgot your co-author's name, so let's let our viewers know.
Adam Gorightly.
Adam Gorightly.
He's written quite a few books, everything from Charles Manson to one on the co-founders of the Discordian religion, on Kerry Thornley. So yeah, his interests are vast and varied, and he asked if I wanted to do this book with him because we've known each other for years, and we've talked about the UFO contactees for years. And one day he just said, "You want to do just an encyclopedia of UFO contactees?" I said, "Of course," because it forces me to research something that I would like to know about, which is why you write anything pretty much.
Well, back in the day when I was a graduate student at Berkeley, my mentor in those years was Arthur M. Young, the inventor of the Bell helicopter, and he purchased a collection of all the books he could find from the UFO contactees and donated them to the local library there because he felt this is so important that we need to be paying attention to people who say they've had face-to-face communication, often lengthy conversations with ostensible extraterrestrial beings.
Yeah. Well, it's a theme that's been it's been throughout history. Human contact with something that's non-human, that is giving them messages about the meaning of life, the future, the security, safety, or whatever, sanity of the human race, and a spiritual message. And so, the contactee movement it fits very comfortably in the history of religious development and revelation. And people have even called the contactees modern saints.
Well, it's not so different from people who claim that they were visited by an angel.
Yeah. No, in general, it's kind of the same thing. And people, their culture, the time frame, they will take whatever that is and push it through that filter. And sometimes it happens to be a Catholic or a Christian filter. Sometimes it happens to be a Hindu filter or a Zen filter or whatever. But all these people seem to be reporting the same thing, that something that is not them has contacted them and told them that there's something important they need to communicate to other people. And they've been chosen to do this. And that can range anywhere to me from an actual discarnate intelligence that is talking to people to somebody completely making it up. And if you look at the contactees, I think that that spectrum is represented very well throughout the contactee movement, at least the parts we examine in the book, which was very early. We even go into Blavatsky, I believe, because she said that she had entities talking to her from Mars and Venus and things like that, and goes all the way up to pretty much 70s, 80s, sometimes in 1970s, 80s. Sometime in there. But through that period, the mid 20th century to the later mid 20th century, there was a lot of activity around this. And the new model for it was the UFO, because in 1947 people became very interested in what they eventually called flying saucers. So there's a ready-made model for these new saints to use to tell people where these messages were coming from. And it's funny because every time a friend of mine, Donna Cossey, pointed out, as time went on, the aliens, who the space people, started coming from further and further away as astronomy made more strides into, what is further away from the solar system. So they went from being from Mars and Venus and Jupiter and all that, all the way out to, people from, different star systems now and different galaxies and all that. And I don't think that takes away from the messages, and I don't think it takes away from the reality of the phenomenon at all. To me, it makes it richer and more interesting. The book at times is a little bit cynical, but there's a lot of funny stuff involved with the contactees. Just like there is now. Another friend of mine, Josh Cutchin, says that disreputability is baked into the UFO thing. It's just there. It's always going to be there. And you have to deal with it, honor it, accept it, and laugh at it too when it's funny.
Well, it's becoming a little less disreputable in recent years because of government acknowledgement. Now, your book is titled A is for Adamski. That makes sense. George Adamski was one of the first and certainly one of the most famous of the contactees.
Yeah, he was. He's sometime in the early 1950s, he said that he was contacted and told to go out to the desert to a certain place in Southern California in the desert, which I've been to. It's actually kind of interesting. And psychically told to drive out there with one of the other contactees, George Hunt Williamson, and then his wife or girlfriend and Adamski's secretary. And he told them to park the car, and he was going to run over. He said that a ship landed, and I have to go over and meet it. And the three other people with him signed an affidavit saying they saw the ship and saw him meeting with somebody. He said this ship landed, a few hundred yards away from him. A being came out and waved at him and said, hello, George, and met with him for a while. And the first meeting was the message we always hear: mankind is in trouble. Nuclear weapons are going to destroy the planet unless something is done about it, and that you have been chosen to give our message to the Earth people. And strangely enough, right after, he called his friends over, and there were footprints in the ground from his space brother friend, who he called Orthon, and they made plaster casts of the footprints. And the footprints had symbols in them, as if he had sneakers on with alien writing on them. Mm. And his friend Williamson supposedly decoded these symbols, which he called the Solexmal. So Solexmal. He said that was the alien language. That's a whole nother part of UFO study, is the study of alien languages and scripts and things. Mm-hmm. I had a friend, Mario Pozzoglini, he was a psychologist, so that was his psychologist. That was his specialty, was alien languages and received scripts. But anyway, Adamski, at that point, he started writing up his experiences and publishing them and going on the lecture circuit. And he was a compelling speaker and a nice person. He was charismatic. And so his message got out to quite a few people. I mean, there's always like a superstar in any field, and Adamski turned out to be the one.
I was a child when I read his book.
Me too. Yeah. I told you in the other interview that I'd go to the library and just get all these books on UFOs, and one of them was Inside the Spaceships. Yeah. His first book. And it fascinated me. I totally 100% believed it when I read it. Mm-hmm. And, to my mind, if you talk about contactees, Adamski, I'm pretty sure he either channeled or made up a lot of the stuff that he talked about. But there are others like Orfeo Angelucci, who people consider a little bit more of a mystic and a little bit less. He doesn't seem like a sophisticated type to be able to do this. And so my idea about a lot of contactees is that they had mystical experiences, and they chose to communicate them in this, new form, which was, space people coming and telling them these things. And that these actual experiences became connected to the UFO thing, because that was the popular thing at the time, and something you could take something like this and take all these ideas and put them on some some mystery that can't really be checked out. And that, I mean, that's, I can't remember which saint said this, but his idea, his quote was, "I believe because it is absurd," because it makes no logical sense. And so what's the guile behind making no logical sense? There must be a message in there. And the messages, and from all the contactees, were messages of brotherhood and compassion, things like that. All wonderful messages, and very few of them had anything negative to say or anything except about humanity.
Well, I recall being in the Joshua Tree, Palm Desert area, 29 Palms. Adamski had a property in that area in the desert. He was well known, and he built.
That was George Van Tassel, actually.
Oh, is that Van Tassel?
Another contactee, okay. Yes.
Who built this building. It was called the Integratron, as I recall. That was Van Tassel. Yes, it's still there. It was supposedly for healing purposes.
Yeah, I know the people that own that building now. It was abandoned for many years. It almost went into disrepair and fell down, but they took it over and restored it, and it's a beautiful building. George Van Tassel used to work for, I believe, Hughes Aircraft. And he was a pilot. He was a private pilot, and so am I. So I have this kind of, spiritual connection to George Van Tassel. But he leased some land from the government, BLM land, out near Joshua Tree, 29 Palms, near a little town called Landers, which was named after a family that founded it, the Landers family. And he used to go out there. He lived in Los Angeles. But a guy came into his service station. He was working at a service station at the time, or happened to be there, and his car broke down. And he was a guy, a prospector that lived out in the desert. His name was Frank Kreitzer, German. And he told Van Tassel about this giant rock out in the desert and how he was living there. And Van Tassel thought, this would be a nice place to go out and take my family and camp. And he did. Kreitzer eventually he became under suspicion during World War II of being a spy since he was German. And some deputies came out and either killed him or set off some dynamite and blew him up. Oh. Yeah. Van Tassel moved out there. He said there was still like blood on the walls of this dwelling he'd built underneath giant rock. He just tunneled underneath it and poured in concrete and made walls and basically lived there because in the desert in the summer it's nice and cool in there. It would be like 20 degrees, 30 degrees cooler than outside.
Now there is a place out there, in fact, I'm scheduled to visit in a few weeks called Giant Rock.
Yes.
It's still there, big rock.
It is. It split about 20 years ago, so it's not as giant as it used to be, but it's still, you can see what it was. I actually started going out there before it split.
I had plans to visit with my sister-in-law, but tell me, you're saying there was a structure underneath it?
Yes. People are digging it out, too. If you're brave enough, you can actually crawl under there and see part of it.
Right.
I actually, I threw rocks in there to make sure there were no snakes or anything. I crawled under to look because it's been covered up for years. The government came out and filled it in after Van Tassel died. But for a while, Van Tassel was having conventions out there, contactee UFO conventions, because he moved out there and he decided this was a nice place to retire to and bring his family to. I don't know how his family felt about it, but he built he was a private pilot, so he built an airstrip. Actually, Kreitzer had already scraped off an airstrip there. You can still see the airstrip. And he built a little building so pilots would come out there. Because pilots, what they would do, we call it now the $100 hamburger. They would just go places. They would fly to airports and just have something to eat. But he built this little pilot lounge and bathrooms and all that, and a little a cafe called the Come On In. Yeah. And his wife would make hamburgers and apple pie, and so these pilots would come out and visit. But after a while, it became a mecca for UFO enthusiasts and people who were fans of the contactees, because he said that before he built the structure, he was out there camping, sleeping on the desert floor, and somebody approached him in the middle of the night and said, "We would be pleased to show you our craft." And he said he got up and went inside this UFO, and this being, I can't remember what his being's name was, but he said that he had messages to give to the people of Earth, and he wanted Van Tassel to help him with these messages. And so because of that, he started writing books about it. And then he started these conventions called the Giant Rock Interplanetary Spacecraft Conventions, which ran from the mid-1950s to the end of the 1970s, which was when Van Tassel died.
But he built the Integratron.
Yeah, he said that the space people had psychically or telepathically instructed him on how to build this machine that would make people, it was basically a rejuvenation machine that would keep people young. So that they wouldn't have, so as he said, they wouldn't have to reincarnate to take care of their karma. And he said when it was finished, people could just walk through it and all their cells would be rejuvenated. They could live a lot longer and work out their karma that way in one life instead of having to live a bunch of lives. He built most of it. And it was supposed to actually have moving parts in it. The entire thing is built without any metal fasteners. He did the entire thing with just with glue and wood. And it looks like an observatory. It's just basically a round building with a dome.
Yes.
And it was supposed to act as a machine, and the bottom part was supposed to be a capacitor, like a battery, and people would walk through one door and out the other. He had drawings about how this would work. And but he died before it could be finished. And he had a magazine called the Proceedings of the College of Universal Wisdom, which is what he called his school. And he asked people for donations for the Integratron because the space people told him he's supposed to build it. And money poured in, and he actually got the money and built this thing. But it never got completed. He never got to the point where it would actually work. It was supposed to work on the middle part was supposed to spin, and there were little posts sticking out. It was supposed to create a static electric charge and build up the static electric charge inside the building. And now it doesn't work. If I was a multimillionaire, I would put money in and have it fixed so it would actually work. I would love to see that thing working. If for nothing else, just to get Van Tassel's dream realized. But yeah, he did these conventions for years, and all the contactees came and gave presentations. He built a speaker's platform up on the rock. Adamski came. George Hunt Williamson came. Orfeo Angelucci, who I've mentioned, came. All these people would come and listen to these lectures, and people said they had sightings there and meetings with space brothers there. People also hoaxed them and sent up balloons to mess with them. It was just this crazy hodgepodge of all these different people who are interested in UFOs. Everyone from total believers of the Space Brothers to people that were completely cynical but very interested in it. Edward Rappelt, who was the head of, was he head of Blue Book? He was
Air Force pilot, was he?
Yeah. He was extremely skeptical about the Space Brother thing, but he would go to the conventions because he just liked seeing these people and talking to them. I think a lot of skeptics are like that now. They're very, very interested because they think it's it's an interesting, crazy thing. I don't believe that, but it's so fun to go out there. And people would sell books and T-shirts, and there were female contactees there. It was a wonderful circus for a while.
Well, the whole UFO community has felt like a circus for a long time.
Yeah, it has. And I kind of love that about it, Jeff. I mean, I kind of don't want it to be respectable or completely. I don't want it to be, something where people are very serious, because I don't think if there are space brothers, I don't think they want us to be totally serious about it either. And that, that tricksterish element and the joy and all that, I think that's an important part of the UFO mythos, an important part of why people are interested in it. It shouldn't be lost. And I think that's why we were a little silly in the, A is for Adamski book in pointing out when something was kind of silly, but also that the idea that some of these people did have actual, real spiritual experiences and openings up of awareness. And
well, Adamski's description doesn't sound like a spiritual experience so much as an actual encounter with the footprints on the ground and so on.
I think they wanted to give a spiritual message, but they wanted to also ground it in some sort of reality, because that's what people wanted then. They weren't trying to get an audience of people that were just purely spiritual or believing in something that was not, they couldn't hold in their hands or see or whatever. So they had to present these artifacts to them. And I think that was, part of the show. And I think they realized that. I mean, we have to have a spiel here, or people aren't going to listen to the message. And also, I mean, there's ego reasons for it, and just the way that popular culture works. And they wanted to say this is grounded in science. This is, the space people are much more advanced than us in their scientific methodologies and what they've been able to do. Obviously, they can fly through space in spaceships. And so because they have this magical technology, they must have an insight into how the spirit works and how it can be developed to the point where it is it instead of working against spirit and against compassion and against religion, that we can integrate these two things. In fact, one of the groups, the Unarius Academy, Unarius group, Unarius in San Diego, which still exists, they're actually called the Unarius Academy of Science, and their science is, they say, is a spiritual science given to them by space people from different galaxies.
These are the people who have the book, the large book, Unarius book.
No, oh wow, what's the name of that book? It's I can't remember the name of that big book.
Well, I think it had Unarius in there.
Well, Unarius has a lot of different books.
Okay.
They've got, in fact, when I went down there to visit them the first article I ever wrote about UFO anything was in 1987. I went and visited the Unarius Society. And they gave me a stack of channeled books from Ruth Norman and her husband, Ernest Norman. And she was still alive at the time. I'm still trying to think of the name of the book. It's a very famous channeled book, but it doesn't come from the contactee movement. But it's basically the same kind of thing. Most of the contactee stuff was either, they said, dictated to them by Space Brothers, or a lot of the times channeled. George Van Tassel used to have channeling sessions during these conventions. They would go into the rooms under the giant rock, and he would go into a trance. You can hear recordings of these online. You can find them, where he just starts saying, I am so-and-so, and I bring you love. And today's lecture is about, the spiritual body. And he would go into this lecture. And these things were transcribed and put in their books.
So there's a real overlap between the contactee movement and channeling movement.
Yes, very much so. And this is still present now.
Sure.
People are still saying they're being contacted by space people, and it's updated to now. But yeah, there's a very specific history of channeled material. It goes back, you could say that large parts of the Christian Bible were channeled. And
the Quran.
Yeah, exactly. And that they address spiritual truths so that it doesn't have to be, where somebody actually does research or talks to a spiritual master or whatever. The spiritual master channels these truths directly from whatever source they're coming from. And the contactees, I think, very much are in this tradition. And I think people in the 1950s, especially after the atomic bomb in World War II, the beatnik movement was during that. There was a very and there always has been in the United States, but especially after World War II, a very strong outsider, anti-establishment feeling about things that, we've trusted all these people to take care of us, and they've given us wars and the atomic bomb. So how are we going to trust them on anything else? Yeah. To the point where the FBI actually investigated a lot of the contactees, and were at the UFO conventions and all that, because they were afraid there were communist, anti-government influence in there, and could be used to influence the people against the United States government. They were actually scared about that stuff, and all these people wanted was some kind of assurance that we weren't here for nothing and weren't going to be blown to bits in any second. And it manifested as belief in space people who had our best interest in mind, just as Jesus had our best interest in mind, and Lord Krishna had our best interest in mind, and was trying to tell us how to deal with life in this plane and on this planet and in this physical existence, so that it accorded with the highest spiritual principles. And this is what most of the contactees talked about. Whether they were charlatans or not, they all had this same message.
Well, when I was in Berkeley in the 1970s, there was an organization called the One World Family, headed by a fellow named Alan Noonan, who claimed to be a contactee.
Yeah, I think he's later called Alan Michael.
Yes, Alan Michael.
I have one of their records.
They were lovely people. I got to know them. They ran a restaurant in Berkeley, a big restaurant called the Mustard Seed, all organic food. They would associate with various other spiritual communities, yoga and Buddhism and so on, and they were known as one of the other New Age spiritual communities in the San Francisco Bay Area.
Yeah. And they just happened to be getting their information from space people.
Yeah.
You know, and in the 70s, I think, late 60s and 70s, nobody cared where you got your message from as long as it aligned with, you know, your values. If it aligned with your values and you seemed like, you know, you had the best interests of everybody in mind, it was okay to have all this mixing and matching and syncretism of these different groups.
I recall meeting with these people from the One World Family. This was in the psychedelic era. They were taking psychedelics. And they told me they were all together. They were outside. They were taking psychedelics when some UFOs appeared in the sky and wrote out the words peace, love, and joy in the sky. And everybody could see it.
I don't doubt it. And if everybody is on drugs, I suppose that they're going to have a shared hallucination. The funny thing is people make the mistake, it's like they're on drugs, therefore it was not true. It's like, no, I think it's because that some spiritual part of them was opened up, and that whether there were UFOs there or not, whatever it was, that spiritual truth was revealed to them by that encounter. And that, you know, there's a spiritual truth to it. There doesn't have to be a physical truth to it, as long as it is, it aligns with their belief system and aligns with the message they're trying to get out to people. And, you know, Alan Michael, the funny thing is, we were talking about giant rock. I think, as I recall, his story was he got a psychic message one time to go out to a giant rock in the desert, and that would be what his destiny was. And he went out to one of the Van Tassel conventions, and that's how he started his ideas about One World Family and how he began his group. He was inspired by George Van Tassel, actually, by one of the other contactees.
All the contactees that you've written about, and there are dozens, who would you say in your mind has the greatest possibility of being credible?
It's a loaded question because, you know, do you think spiritually credible, physically credible, you know, culturally credible? In my mind, that question is credible, meaning do they believe their own story completely? Are they absolutely sincere about it? And in that case, there's a few of them. The first one that comes to mind is Orfeo Angelucci, because he was almost, to my mind, he didn't have enough guile in him to make anything up. And he wrote a few different books. One of them was Son of the Sun, talking about his contact with different space people and the things they told him. It was basically the same message. But if you read his material and you see, I've seen actually video of him a long time ago, he almost seems mystified in his sincerity about what happened to him. And actually, I think, I believe, I may be wrong, Carl Jung actually cited him as a true mystic in one of the books he wrote in the Flying Saucers, A Modern Myth of Things Seen in the Skies. And I don't think Orfeo Angelucci actually made everything up. Everything that he talked about, he believed actually happened to him. And it's almost like he had a naive sense of mythology and about a history of spirit and religion. He said that he was driving home from work one day. All these people seem to work for aerospace companies. He was driving home from work one day in Glendale, California, and he said he was crossing over a river, which is actually kind of significant. A river is, is quite significant as a liminal space and a boundary between different areas. He said he was driving over the river and he was told to pull his, or a dry river actually, which is even more significant. He was told to pull his car off, and a a being appeared to him and put a TV screen, as he said, in front of him and started showing him illustrations of what the world was like, what their world was like, spiritual truths about the human race, and actually offered him a drink to drink. And when he drank this, he said it was pearlescent, I think. When he drank this drink, his eyes became opened to these spiritual truths. And this is a common theme throughout religion, of people meeting people and either eating food or being taken to a place or invited in or given something to drink, and having this interaction with ascended masters or strangers like this that are non-human. The other person that fascinated me, because of my art history background, was a woman named Paulina Peavy, who was born in 1900 and died in 1999. She was an artist, and she wrote a book called My Life with UFO. What she said was sometime in the late 1940s, she visited a spiritualist church. And at that point, she realized that she was in contact with somebody who she called Lakaimo. And she drew pictures of him. She was an incredibly good artist. And this entity called Lakaimo would channel her paintings to her. And every time she did a painting, she said she had to create a mask that she put over her face to allow her to communicate more clearly with her alien channel, Lakaimo. And you can go online. You can see she was actually on Long John Neville once, and she channeled. And you can hear this. You can hear this recording. And Neville actually asks her, "So what is it like when you talk to these entities?" And it's funny. She starts talking in her own voice, and then she goes, "Ho, ho, ho, ho," and then her voice gets very deep. And she says, "I am now speaking through Paulina Peavy. I am not Paulina Peavy." And she does this channeling session for about 10 minutes, and then she drops out of it. And she, apparently doesn't know what happened exactly. She goes, "Well, that's just what happens." And I don't think she was making this up. I think she really did. If it didn't actually happen, she actually believed she was in contact with this entity that was guiding her life and telling her, guiding her artwork, which is stunningly beautiful, her artwork. And that, I consider her a contactee because of the method by which she became inspired. And I think, there's a lot of people that are also artists that say the art doesn't come from them, it comes through them.
Sure.
And if you've ever done any kind of writing or any kind of creative work, it seems like when you're on autopilot, it is coming through you. It's just waiting there, and it has to come out through your hands and your fingers and your mind. Yeah. And that's kind of how she felt about her inspiration. But hers happened to be personified in this person that she thought was an alien from some other planet. And it also had very feminist ideas that it communicated through her. And she said, in the future, there will be no men, and all women will have children without having sex with men, and women will run the planet, and eventually men will disappear. Because she was treated very badly when she was a child, and she had a very abusive husband. And so these things formed her worldview. And so, what do you think is going to come out of something she channels, but a very strongly feminist message? And I had a guy on my show, this professor, Stephen Finley, who you might want to have on your show from Louisiana State University. And he talked to me about the Nation of Islam. And the show was about the Nation of Islam as a UFO group or cult. Because he said that Louis Farrakhan is very interested in the UFO subject. You can basically consider him a contactee, because he says he contacted he went to Mexico with a group sometime in the 1970s, I think, and saw a giant mothership above this mountain in Mexico and talked to the people in there. And of course, their cosmology is that the people in space who are in charge are dark-skinned, and that the white people on the planet are an aberration. The first thing he does, I saw him lecture once, the first thing he did was show pictures of lynchings. And he said, "I'm showing you this to show you that the context of what this belief system is. And the context of the belief system is, we've been treated like this and we don't want anything to do with your belief system. We have our own belief system. And that is where a lot of the tenets of the Farrakhan's group come from. Mm-hmm. And so it's very interesting to see what setting the different people have and how they channel the Space Brother message, whatever that happens to be. And it just shows you the varieties of experience that come through and use the UFO and the space people idea as their lens.
Obviously, from your telling of it, there's an enormous element of human psychology that colors each of these experiences.
It has to be. When you're talking about, making food or filling your gas tank or whatever, that's a very physical, actual, taking out the trash or whatever. That's very easy for anybody to understand. But when you start talking about things that not everybody has normal experience with, mm-hmm. your mind and your psychology and your culture and everything, your nervous system, your genetics, your upbringing, all this comes into how you frame and focus whatever this weird experience was. And, one of the ways to focus this weird experience in our culture is through religion and through spirituality and through these kind of beliefs, where, as I said, I believe it because it is absurd. Mm-hmm. It's not something that can be explained normally. Therefore, we must come up with another explanation. And it makes it, in that case, it'll make something even more true. It becomes on another level a type of spiritual truth.
Well, in your research of contactees, did you find any that were able to demonstrate unique, say, paranormal abilities or other unique abilities as a way of proving that their contact was authentic?
The only one I can think of who you could probably call a contactee was the guy you wrote about. Mm-hmm. Ted Owens, yeah. I would cite that as a very specific example of such a thing. And he didn't really, as I remember, he didn't really have a spiritual message so much.
It's not so much, but it was there. At one time, he founded a church. He called it the Church of Sota, S-O-T-A, mm-hmm. which stood for Secrets of the Ages.
Uh-huh.
So, yeah, there was a spiritual component. Yeah. I actually took his training, so he did a hypnotic training, and there were definitely spiritual elements there.
Mm-hmm. I don't think, as far as I can recall, at least in the classic contactee sense, there weren't any of the actual contactees that would say, here is, they would not do tricks, or they would not manifest anything, or tell the future or anything like that. They basically would channel these spiritual truths and help people kind of deal with their anxieties that were coming to the fore in the middle of the 20th century. And I think that, and the only other one I could think of, if you could call him a contactee, I suppose would be Uri Geller. Mm-hmm. And there's some spiritual component to his experiences. But yeah, I mean, he very definitely demonstrated what people would call psychic and paranormal abilities. Yeah.
There's a lot of UFO lore associated with him.
Yeah, he said that he saw a UFO when he was a child, and that it spoke to him. And then when he was working with Puharich, he said there was a group called Spectra, I believe, or the entity was called Spectra, and the group was called Huva, I think, and they were channeling these messages through him. But he didn't create a religious movement based on his abilities.
No, he tried to basically hide from all of that history.
Yeah, because I think he thought, and maybe people told him, it would take away from what he was trying to demonstrate in labs with mm-hmm. his paranormal abilities. Yeah. And his psychic abilities, and so that was kind of stepped on. It's like, you can't be talking about that, because otherwise scientists won't be interested.
Well, I think in the parapsychology community there was a strong sense that looking into UFOs was taking things a step too far. We got enough trouble with dealing with ESP and psychokinesis. We don't need UFOs, and I think on the ufology side they felt much the same.
Yeah, these groups didn't want to mix with each other, even though there was just so much evidence being thrown at them that there was so much mixing between the two, or between the three, or whatever. Mm-hmm. People that are into Bigfoot say they can channel Bigfoot. So it's these there, or Bigfoot does psychic thing, and there's at least in the literature, demonstrably, many people that have UFO encounters, especially closer ones, will start having psychic things happen in their life. They'll have poltergeist activity. They'll start channeling. It flips a switch in their mind, and different abilities seem to come out.
Here we are in 2022. Mm-hmm. So there's still a lot of contactees out there. Are any of the currently popular contactees of interest to you?
You know what's funny? The one that's most interesting to me is Whitley Strieber. Mm-hmm. I know he's the most famous one, but I've been talking to him for a few years, and it's funny because I tell him this, and he said, "Yeah, that's pretty much what's going on." People ask me, why do you believe Whitley Strieber? Mm-hmm. Why do you believe that his stories about what's happened to him? And I tell them, I believe him in the same way I believe the Beatles wrote good music, or I believe that Salvador Dali made beautiful paintings, or I believe that that Leonardo made beautiful paintings, or whatever, or that Stanley Kubrick made incredible movies. Mm-hmm. You can't ask the question, do you believe somebody's physical truth? I believe their vision and their spiritual truth. If I was standing there during whatever happened to Whitley, or any abductee really, I don't know what I'd see. I don't know if I would see an alien in the room with them. I don't know if I'd see a mist floating around, or I would just see them jerking around on the bed. I have no idea. And those may not even be the right questions. The important part of it to me is that they are trying to communicate what happened to them with the language and the metaphors that they have available to them. And in the midst of those language and metaphors and their experiences, that we can glean some sort of truth that becomes actually very personal. And I think that the UFO thing is going to be understood in the future on a personal level, on an individual level. And this is actually an idea I got from Whitley. Mm. He just said, the visitors are trying to contact us in the most democratic way possible, whatever you think the visitors are. And I do actually think there are intelligences or something, an external source for what's going on with people that contact, or say they contact entities or space brothers or whatever. In a lot of cases, there is some sort of external source. We've discussed it. It's been that way throughout history. Something happens to somebody, they are changed very profoundly, and they want to communicate that with people. They want to integrate it into their lives so that they can live with it, and they don't have to worry about it, and don't have to be disturbed, and don't have to lose sleep. Whatever explanation or truth they can come to that helps them deal with this and continue on with their lives in some sort of normal, way, without having to be committed or given drugs or whatever, that's what's most important. And so I think that if you can come to your own truth with it, you can actually get a greater understanding. And the thing that made me think about this is, you go to a UFO convention or someplace where contactees or abductees more likely now are talking, or somebody that's just had an experience. They can have completely different experiences. I saw something come up to my car, or I saw something in my bedroom, or whatever. Their experiences could have no intersection of the recall or the physical experience, but they both know that the same thing happened to them. Just intuitively, they'll know that they've both experienced something that's out of the ordinary. And to me, that's a key to what's going on here, and why I'm kind of pushing for, I'm sorry we can't reproduce it scientifically, but we can reproduce the understanding, you know what I mean, on an individual basis. And I don't think the UFO subject is presented to people in a way that can be discussed as we discuss politics or anything practical. It has to be discussed in a way where everybody knows what they're talking about, even though they all have different ways to describe it. And that, I think that reality is the most bedrock reality you can find about the UFO subject right now.
Well, it reminds me of the Dylan line, there's something going on here, but you don't know what it is.
Exactly.
Do you, Mr. Jones?
Jung said there's something is seen, but no one knows what. And he said this in the 1950s, and it's as true now as it was then.
Well, Greg Bishop, once again, a delightful, informative conversation. Thank you so much for being with me.
Thank you for having me.
And for those of you listening or watching, thank you for being with us.